before it gets dark outside.
Okay, accepted.
So it wasn't exactly, it wasn't me who said it, but we have a goal.
So I didn't hear her say that we're recording, but I assume we're recording. Perfect. Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to the March committee meeting of Chelsea Land Use. My name is Carrie Keenan. Jessica Chait and I are co-chairs of this committee, which usually meets monthly. As per the mayor's orders, we have been meeting remotely. This meeting is being recorded and is currently live streaming on YouTube. The agenda for tonight is public and can be viewed on Community Board 4 website. We encourage you to sign up for eBlast to get the agenda. If this is your first time at a meeting, there are some things you should know about the process. After each presentation, first the committee will ask questions to the presenter, then members of the public can ask questions or make a comment. Subsequently, the discussion goes back to the committee. On some agenda items, committee members may next vote to make a recommendation, which usually results in a letter for the full board to vote on. If you want to comment or ask a question after a presentation and after the committee has spoken, you must press the raised hand button on your screen and we will call on you to unmute, which is usually on your bottom right. And if you're calling in, use *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute. If anyone has any questions regarding what I just shared, please raise your hand now. Seeing none, maybe everyone can take a quick second to introduce themselves. Hector?
Hello, everybody. I am Hector Vasquez, and I'm on the committee.
Pamela?
I am Pamela Wolf, Chelsea resident and public member of CB4 and a member of this committee.
Dave?
I'm Dave Holoka. I live on 19th Street between 9th and 10th Avenue. I'm a member of this committee and Waterfront Parks and Environment.
Paul?
I'm Paul Devlin, member of this committee and also co-chair of the Hell's Kitchen Land Use Committee.
Betty?
Betty McIntosh, committee member and also committee member of Housing, Health and Human Services.
Tina?
Hi, I'm Tina DiGentonio. I even messed up my own name. Come on. With this committee and Waterfront Parks. And I just want to take 2 seconds to say how much I learned from each of you and how impressive everybody is. It's it never ceases to amaze me. And I've been a member of the board for a while. So thank you for being my teachers.
Thanks, Tina. Mike?
Mike Noble, a member of the committee and also a member of the Business License and Permits Committee.
Mrinal?
Hello, everyone. I'm Ronald Vikram. I'm a member of the Chelsea Land Use Committee and of the WPE Committee.
Marty?
Hi, I'm a member of this committee and co-chair of Waterfront Parks and Environment.
Lowell?
Lowell Kern, I'm a 38-year resident in Chelsea.
And Jessica?
Good evening, everyone. Jessica Chait. I'm co-chair of this committee together with Carrie, and I'm a member of Housing, Health and Human Services and first vice chair of the board.
Thanks, everybody. So we have 2 agenda items tonight, and we are going to accept David's challenge to be done before the sun goes down, which might be 10 minutes, but so we'll get right to it. The first is a presentation by the 5 Borough Housing Movement, John Sanchez. As everybody knows, if you've read your emails, that this presentation also came before Clinton Hell's Kitchen Land Use earlier this month. We had a discussion with Paul and JD about potentially writing a letter from both committees. So that is something we'll be discussing after we hear the presentation, and Paul can help, fill us in on the POV from the other land use committee. And with that said, we'll turn it over to John.
Great. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity. My name is John Sanchez. I'm the Executive Director of 5 Borough Housing Movement. And I formerly was the District Manager of Bronx Community Board 6 for 5 years. So I appreciate all of the hard work that you do. Tonight, I'll be discussing our advocacy around office to residential conversions and some changes to state law that we're going to community boards for in efforts to seek support when it comes to our state legislators. To give some background, the 5 Borough Housing Movement is comprised of different industries, different sectors that came together after the governor and mayor convened the New York panel, where they realized people aren't going into the office 5 days a week anymore, but how can we revitalize business districts in a way that they're not only business districts, but districts where people can live as well. The Department of City Planning released its own study on the feasibility of office conversions, including what's needed on the city level and what's needed on the state level to actually make this happen. As many of you know, the Manhattan office market has changed. Vacancy rates for Class B and Class C spaces remain at all-time highs. And Class B and Class C spaces are office buildings that tend not to have the amenities of new buildings. And we understand that New York's in a housing crisis. Compared to other cities across the country, we are building less housing and people are going to other states across the country. And it's even being seen with the census where we lost some congressional representation. And we also see that housing production itself is unequal. If you look at this chart, 10 community boards, including your community board, account for nearly half of the new housing that's been built across the city. Ideally, we have a pie chart where every community board was listed with a significant percentage of contributing to our need. This is even more pronounced when it comes to affordable housing construction. I'm from the Central Bronx, where thousands of affordable housing units have been built, but even places like the North Shore of Staten Island have produced more housing than certain areas that are close to transit and other amenities. And we don't think this is a sustainable way to have housing policy. We think office conversions can be one piece of that. And I want to commend your community board for citing specific areas where housing could be built in your community board. So what we advocate for is we want to see changes in state law to allow for office conversions if building owners so choose, allow for the city to determine where a higher FAR makes sense, and ensure that there's some affordability if there are some office conversions that take place. This is a rendering of 260 Madison Avenue. This is what the office looks like now. This is just a rendering of what it could look like if it were to be converted to residential. So right now, the state law is a patchwork of laws in terms of who can convert and who can't. Buildings built before 1961 have flexibility to convert to residential. Buildings built between 1961 and 1977, they can only convert if they're in Lower Manhattan, south of Murray Street. And buildings built after 1977 can't convert at all. What we propose and what we are supportive of, and what the governor proposed, was that there be a uniform threshold of 1990. Buildings built before 1990 would have the option to convert to residential. In terms of the type of offices that will convert, it depends on the floor plate and if the building has operable windows or not. Type 1 buildings, they tend to be smaller. These are more typically seen in Soho and Tribeca. Type 2 and Type 3, these are bigger office buildings. They don't have operable windows. They're more difficult to convert, but they can yield more units. These are 2 examples of conversions that have happened already. The first one, this is 26th and 5th Avenue, just west of Madison Square Park. This is an easier type of conversion, kind of looks like an apartment building already. 180 Water Street, this is a office building that's harder to convert. They had to install a carved courtyard. It's more difficult to convert these. This is also typical of the stock in Lower Manhattan. The mayor toured a building very similar to this at 160 Water Street that's planning to convert. In terms of how many units could convert, we have a great model. The 421G program was implemented by the state between 1995 and 2006. And the idea was to incentivize Lower Manhattan to be revitalized. And it was a success. About 13,000 units were created. The big difference is that these were all market rate. We're proposing a new program where there is some affordability. And this is just comparing the two programs. We think a new program could produce around 20,000 units over a decade. The governor's proposing that the affordable units would be permanently affordable, even when the tax incentive expires. The building owner can't sell the building and then convert the affordable units to condos and co-ops. And even though the impact would be mostly in Manhattan, south of 96th Street, there would be pockets of downtown Brooklyn, the South Bronx, Jamaica, Queens, that have expressed interest if they're given the opportunity. In total, we think about 200 buildings would ultimately convert, less than 5% of New York City's office stock. And to give context on where this proposal is on the state budget, this proposal is in the governor's budget, and the proposal for office conversions, including the tax incentive, is in the state Senate's one House budget bill. The other part of our advocacy is around the FAR cap. The FAR cap is a law from 1961, which takes away local control from New York City. It limits how much housing can be built in New York City, and this mostly impacts Manhattan, south of 96th Street. A few pockets of downtown Brooklyn, some bit of Long Island City. As you know, FAR isn't necessarily a height cap, it's a density cap. You can have buildings of differing heights with the same FAR. And it's important to know that hundreds of buildings exceed the FAR cap today. This cents for building is in my neighborhood in the Bronx, and about 400 of the buildings that were grandfathered in, more than half are less than 20 stories. We propose that the city has the opportunity to determine where does it make sense to have a higher FAR and where does it not make sense. In terms of what would happen if the state lifted the cap tomorrow, well, nothing would happen. The city would then have to act. It would have to go through a text amendment. It would have to go through the ULURP process, community board review, borough president review, city council review, etc. This just allows the city to make this determination rather than having its hands tied by the state. There is no FAR cap for Yonkers, Long Island, New Rochelle, nor the city and the state has this cap, only New York City. These are some other benefits we think that this project could produce. We understand transit ridership still hasn't recovered to pre-pandemic levels. If more people are living in these commercial areas, that'll help boost transit ridership. More commercial activity for local businesses because people live in the neighborhood and they'll be around after 5 p.m. And of course, people from across the 5 boroughs could work on the construction projects. The last slide just highlights some of our partners: the Garment District Alliance, East Midtown Partnership, Grand Central Partnership. Several community boards in the Bronx and Queens are supportive. And we would welcome if Community Board 4 could be supportive in some way. That's the last slide, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Gary, I see your hand. Sorry, there's something loud happening here, but hopefully you can hear me. Gary.
Yeah, thanks, John. I don't usually speak first, but I just have 2 quick clarifying questions because the presentation you just showed us is not the same presentation we have in the Dropbox. One of those is you mentioned that New York City is the only city to have the FAR cap of 12. And is that not because that only applies to cities of over 1 million people?
Yes.
So it's really not applicable to any other city in New York State?
At this moment, no.
Okay, thanks. And then secondly, can you just go back to the page before the FAR cap lift, which is not in the document that we have? I'm sorry, the page, I couldn't see the page number. So a little bit further back, a little bit further. Yes, right here. I'm curious why, sorry, I just want to make sure. I'm curious why this cannot be achieved without lifting the cap. This is a new page for me, so I'm trying to understand it.
So in certain cases, the cap wouldn't need to be lifted to convert offices. But where there are offices that exceed the cap right now for commercial, because there is no cap for commercial, you would have a situation where the building owner can't convert all of their building to residential. So not every office would be impacted, but there are a select few that would be impacted if the cap isn't lifted.
So couldn't you recommend that those specific buildings have their cap lifted without a wholesale lift of the cap?
Some members of the legislature are supportive of that very thing, but we're advocating for the city to determine lifting the cap for new construction as well. But we understand the point.
Yes, I'm just trying to get to what is the purpose here to, sort of surgically find the buildings that are applicable to the desire to convert office buildings into residential, or is the purpose to get the FAR cap lifted? Because they feel like two very different things to me, and I'm not sure why we can't just talk about the first.
Well, the purpose is both. And there are some areas that are zoned for their max residential in the city where they can't have more affordable housing. They can't take advantage of the MIH program because of the cap. So for example, you may have an area in Lower Manhattan where it's zoned for the max residential right now. Barring a rezoning and barring a lifting of the cap, they can't take advantage of the mandatory inclusionary housing program. So we are advocating for both, but we understand some people only want to lift the cap for office conversions. We understand that. We're just advocating for both.
Okay, thanks. I'll hold the rest of my questions till the rest of the committee gets to ask theirs. Thank you.
I just also want to suggest kind of following the path that the other committee took. I think this is a great opportunity to ask John specific questions about the proposal that 5 Borough Housing Movement is putting forward. And then John's been very generous with his time going to our committee now, or our board twice, and to many other community boards. So I think we should use the time to ask him questions. And then once that's done, John can leave, and then we can have a discussion amongst ourselves about the merits of the different elements of this proposal and what how we want to reconcile with the other committee. Tina?
Yeah, I just need a little information about who we are. Like, who do you represent? Who are the stakeholders? Some real basics in terms of transparency, including who, if any, if you, your entity, or people behind you were the ones to write the legislation that's now up in Albany. Just need a little clarification of the moving parts here.
Sure, yeah, of course. So 5 Borough Housing Movement is supported and funded by groups ranging from the NAACP to building owners to groups like the New York League of Conservation Voters. The legislation that was written was introduced by the governor's budget proposal, and a lot of it was based on the city's report on adaptive reuse that was issued in January. So the city issued that report that Jessica just showed, and the governor's team incorporated that into their budget proposal.
Great. Also, just nuts and bolts, in terms of how this would work, we have the owners or, corporate entities that own these buildings. Where would the money flow from in terms of making these conversions, and what would the rents look like what would the rents be based on?
So the owners would finance the construction. We're not advocating for an incentive for the construction. We're advocating for an incentive for the affordable units. The affordable units, based on the governor's proposal, would range from 40% AMI to about 100% AMI. So roughly $1,800 to $3,000 rents, depending on the household size. That's going to be negotiated by the legislature. They may want deeper affordability. They may want a higher percentage of the building to be affordable, but in those parameters.
So it would be a for-profit, basically enterprise with carve outs for affordable housing or affordable units.
Correct, but it doesn't preclude a building owner from partnering with a nonprofit to provide supportive housing, et cetera.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tina. Dave?
Hi, John. What kind of data do you have that indicates that MIH actually produces affordability and or would create more affordable housing in our district in particular?
Well, the MIH program is pretty new. It's only been around 6 years. I think the best test case right now is the Soho rezoning, which passed around a year and a half ago. They just saw their first project being proposed under the MIH program. It's going to be about 70 units of affordable housing, which is more than what Soho has done in the past 5 years. MIH is not perfect, but it's the program that the city has for rezonings. And there would be affordable housing mandated as a part of any rezoning in that area, especially if an office conversion wanted to exceed the FAR cap, et cetera.
Do you know how many affordable units MIH has produced in those 6 years?
I think it's less than 1,000 so far, but I could be wrong. It's 6-year program. There's been a few rezonings. There's been some spot rezonings and area rezonings. And also MIH is also predicated on 421A, and 421A expired. There are certain markets that are strong where the market rents are very high, where 421A isn't needed because the market rate rents can cover the below market rate rents. That remains to be seen. MIH may need to be tweaked because there is no 421A. So it's just still a little bit unclear until we see what's in the final state budget.
Thank you.
Bull?
Yeah, very quickly, John, what is the magic of the 1990 cutoff that you're proposing?
Yeah, so it's proposed by city planning, and their thinking is twofold. One, typically building owners look at their properties after 30 years. It's the normal term of a commercial mortgage. And because the first cutoff was 1960, they figured 1990 would be good. And also, I'll go back to the chart so you all can see it visually. There wasn't a lot of commercial built right after 1990. If you look at the chart, let me do this. So if you look at the chart after 1990, this bar chart shows very little was built after 1990. And the city doesn't want every space to be eligible to convert because we still value commercial properties. They thought 1990 was a good cutoff. They're not married to that date. If the legislature wants to say 2000, no one would be opposed to it, but they thought that was a fair middle ground.
Okay, thanks. I just didn't understand where that came from. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Bull. Mike Noble?
Well, I'm changing to a newly formed question. When we talk about office conversions, people seem to think that, well, all offices that are more or less empty can be converted, but that's not true. I'm curious to know what kind of analysis you've done to find out just how many appear amenable to this program. The floor plates don't lend themselves in most of these, especially newer buildings, to being converted to residential. And they're not very, the conversion is not very cost effective to start with. So, I mean, have you analyzed that end of it?
Yeah, great question. There was a great article in the New York Times this past weekend detailing how difficult it is to do office conversions. You're exactly right. There's about 50,000 offices south of 96th Street. We only expect about 200 to convert. I mean, the 421G program, which was exclusively for Lower Manhattan, only 98 buildings converted. So we're not talking whole-scale transformation of the office market in New York City. We think expanding the boundaries to outside of Lower Manhattan, including the entire city for buildings built before 1990, we think we could get about double the amount of buildings, so roughly 200. But of course, that can change. The office market may change in 5 years. Building owners may say it's just too expensive. We just want to give them the option because right now they don't have the option.
And just to get back to what I guess Kerry brought up initially about having these two concepts running in tandem. How specifically does lifting the cap actually affect what we're talking about in terms of office conversions? If we did not lift the cap, in other words, how much of a hindrance would that be?
If the cap wasn't lifted, the big commercial buildings that exceed a 12 FAR, they wouldn't be able to convert all of their space to residential. And in fact, they probably wouldn't convert at all. So it limits how much housing can be resulting from conversions. That's not every office. Not every office exceeds a 12 FAR. A lot of them do in Midtown East and Midtown West, but not everyone. So there would still be some conversions. In fact, conversions are happening now. They're happening in Lower Manhattan, all market rate apartments, but it would limit the possibilities for conversions.
And have you considered districts, zoning districts, say the special districts, the historic districts, and whether they'd be carved out?
Yeah, so the city's report did not include historic districts. They were looking at M1 districts. They were looking at dense commercial districts, but the city's task force did not look at historic districts. They excluded them because they didn't think it was appropriate to do that there. And we're supportive of that as well.
Okay, well, that's what I wanted to hear. Good. And you promote that. How many more of these sessions do you have lined up?
Thursday is my last one, a community board in the Bronx, and then it's budget time.
Well, it's going home. Yes, okay. Thank you very much, John. Appreciate it.
Of course, thank you.
Mirinal?
Very quick clarification, actually. Are we proposing lifting the FAR cap only for conversions, or would it be lifted? Will it be not applicable anymore? So new buildings can be built not subject to the FAR cap.
So your committee will decide what you recommend. My group is advocating for the city to determine where a higher FAR is. We want to see the state cap lifted and allow the city to determine where a higher cap is. So we not only want it for office conversions, but we also want it for new construction. But your committee will determine what you're more supportive of, which is fine.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mirinal. Betty?
Yes, hi. I now have enjoyed your presentation twice. I'd like you to go through the proposals and just identify where the community board will have a say and where we won't. In other words, a state law change, do we get a say, is there a formal review process for the community board and the other proposals?
So for state legislation, there isn't a formal review process for the community boards, but we've been going to community boards because changing this state law impacts the city. And we think community boards' voices should be taken into account when shared with the local legislators. So what we do is we share any letters we receive from the community boards with the local assembly members, council members, to let them know what the community board thinks about this. So there's not a formal review process, but we think it's important to go to the community boards to get their opinions on this.
And then there's other proposals that you talked about?
Yeah, so the three proposals, one is to change the multiple dwelling law to standardize the year in which offices can convert. The second one is to include a tax incentive for permanent affordability as a part of those conversions. And the third one is a lifting the state FAR cap. So those are the three changes that we're advocating for.
And what role does the community board have officially?
So no role officially. We're seeking input.
Nothing.
Yeah, no role officially.
No. Okay.
Sorry, John, I'm sorry to interrupt, Betty, but John, can you just repeat, it's the year of the conversion that your request, can you just repeat all three again?
Sure. The first one is to change the multiple dwelling law to allow for office conversions in New York City for buildings built before December of 1990. The second is to provide a tax incentive for permanent affordability as a part of conversions. And the third is to change the multiple dwelling law in terms of lifting the FAR cap of 12.
Thank you. Sorry, Betty, did you have more you wanted to ask?
I think, I think I got it, that none of these proposals will be officially reviewed by, I guess, the community board or the city council. Just wanted to be clear about that. Right, John? None of these go.
That's accurate. That's accurate. I will note that the city council did pass a resolution this week calling for the state to implement a office conversion program with a tax incentive.
Okay, so.
Did that
Yes.
include lifting the FAR cap?
No, that wasn't included in the resolution.
Okay, thank you. I think as the community board, I know we're not supposed to opine now, but we need to keep track of who's reviewing and what they've said, thank you.
Carrie, you had some questions and then I'll close this out.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on Mike's question about historic and special districts in Chelsea. You mentioned historic district being protected, but you didn't mention special district.
Yes, this came up at the other committee. And what I said was that there are special districts in other boroughs, and those community boards are open to seeing development in those special districts. So in terms of our advocacy, we're not advocating for historic districts, but we are including special districts. Obviously, the city would ultimately determine if those would be included at all. The city may determine they don't want to include special districts. We just want that conversation to start, and that can't happen if the cap is still in place.
So just out of curiosity, since the majority of, or your map that you showed us is majority south of 96th Street in Manhattan, what other community boards that have special districts did you talk to that are below 96th Street in Manhattan?
So no, not in 96th Street, but Bronx Community Board 4, they have some special districts as well.
And are they affected by the map that you showed us?
In terms of office conversions, they have a few places. In terms of the FAR, if the local council member wants more density, there are a few buildings that exceed the cap right now in that part of the Bronx. But to your point, mostly Manhattan would be impacted.
My second question is, what is the plan? Let's just say that the cap was lifted. What is the plan? What is your plan for creating infrastructure to, handle that increase in density? We are already maxed out on school seats. We already are like number 4 or 3 in shelter beds, providing shelter beds. So like we're, as a community board, we're pretty, we don't have enough infrastructure to, sustain this plan without a plan for more infrastructure, like schools and police and fire, etc.
Yeah, well, the first thing that would happen if the cap was lifted, as a lot of you know, the city is proposing a citywide text amendment sometime early in 2024. And of course, if the cap was lifted, it would trigger a rezoning for areas that can have a higher than 12 FAR cap. And with a rezoning, the council member usually advocates for infrastructure improvements as well as more density. I know in the Bronx, when the Jerome Avenue rezoning happened, there were calls for schools, community centers, etc., and park space, and that was included as a part of the rezoning. Individual council members will negotiate to make sure that they're getting things in return for the rezoning, including infrastructure. But that's a collaborative process with the community board, city planning, and the council member.
Do you have any data on what kind of infrastructure was actually successfully built in the example you just gave?
Yeah, I can send the link to the district manager and yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Mike, did you have another question for?
Yeah, I did. This just came to my mind. I'm curious about, well, first of all, I hope you folks are mindful of the fact that the special districts are all unique. And in our case, they're very restrictive to some extent. And we certainly wouldn't want to see those provisions messed with, say. So my question is, when you're all done with your advocacy, coming out to people like us, what are you going to do in terms of going back to the governor or whoever put you up to this, with a report and letting them know how people feel and what your thinking might have been in the beginning and what it is now? And I ask you that, have you had your mind changed in any respect with regard to any of the aspects that have been coming up in these community board meetings?
So in terms of what we would do, yep.
You know, I'm saying, yeah, I'm asking, was there an epiphany anywhere along the line with respect to your own thinking, you know?
Yeah, I'll say if we're successful, I think our next step would be working with city planning on the citywide text amendment to make sure that it's reflective of what community boards across the city are saying. For example, when I attended the last committee meeting, there was a big interest in looking at the special district for Hudson Yards. I think that's a piece of information city planning should know if they were going to remap areas with a higher FAR. Another thing I learned was that there were areas in the Bronx that wanted to see if it was feasible to have more density near train stations. I didn't think I was going to hear that. Another thing that surprised me was I thought some community boards would be opposed to the tax incentive for affordability, but I think there was an understanding that to get sub $2,000 rents south of 96th Street, there has to be some type of incentive. Otherwise, developers will just do condos and co-ops. So that was surprising. I thought people were going to dismiss the tax incentive all the way. So that was a pleasant surprise because there's a cost to provide housing, and we want to make sure there's affordable housing included. Those are some initial epiphanies. I'll have more information once the state budget's done.
No, thanks a lot again, John. Thank you.
John, just a question for me, and perhaps my information is incorrect and you'll correct me. I was under the impression that the cap was not entered into either of the preliminary budgets. Can you just speak more to where we are in that process right now and what we can expect, or what is sort of at play right now, in play, I should say?
Yeah, so in terms of what's included in each budget, so the governor included lifting of the cap and an office conversion program. The Senate, one house included an office conversion program, no lifting of the cap. The Assembly, one house budget didn't include either. So that's where we stand. In terms of the negotiations in the next 10 days or so, there's going to be a push and pull. The legislature may ultimately decide they only want to lift the cap for office conversions. They may decide they want to do all three. They may say they want deeper affordability. We don't know. I feel very confident there will be some form of office conversions allowed with some affordability. I think that's the floor of what's going to happen. In terms of the FAR, that's kind of up in the air, but I think we will see an office conversion program in New York City with some affordable units.
Great, thank you, John. And would 5 borough housing movement, could you envision a scenario in which you would affirmatively say that any plan to lift the cap would have to include a meaningful contribution for affordable housing?
Yes, I mean, that's our current view. So yes.
But you specify it with a tax incentive as opposed to just saying they can figure it out.
Yes, because we understand a tax incentive is necessary for these conversions. It's very expensive, and right now only condos are being converted. They're converting them to condos. They're not offering sub $2,000 rents. And we know, unfortunately, rental buildings are tax disadvantaged and condos and co-ops are tax advantaged. And with no tax incentive, developers are more likely to do condos and co-ops because of that fact.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. it doesn't appear we have any comments from the attendees. So I think we thank you for your time. I know you're, again, hard at work bringing this message out there, and there's a lot of interesting things happening, whether we like it or not. So we appreciate the opportunity. Some of us might feel differently. There's a range of opinions here, I'm sure, but we really appreciate you taking the time to hear the voices around this table and those that we represent.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night. Bye.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, John.
So as was mentioned, this was a lot of time was devoted to this topic at the Clinton Hell's Kitchen Land Use Committee and the discussion that followed. Ideally, we think probably on any topic, but this topic included, that one voice from the board is important, right? These letters are going to go to the board for approval, and that we should be, to the extent possible, in sync with one another in terms of the message that we're delivering to our community and the stakeholders, the electeds, et cetera. So we've asked Paul to Carrie sent the video around, so hopefully some of you had a chance to watch it. But Paul, to summarize some of the discussion, but most importantly, sort of where they've netted out. And for us, hopefully, instead of starting from a blank slate, but to sort of react to the points, where can we work from what Paul is, that committee has offered up, and see if we can find a place of alignment so that we can have one letter. I think we should all kind of keep that in mind, not putting Paul in a position of, we don't want to, there was a whole committee discussion, so he may need to take things back to that committee, et cetera, but hopefully we can get to a place where we're clear on the points that we do and don't agree on, so that we can try to narrow that daylight between us. Can I just say one quick thing? Just maybe to frame this up a little bit, and Paul, you were probably going to say this anyway, but the decision that Clinton Hell's Kitchen Land Use voted on and approved was to not respond to this group 5 borough housing, instead to write a letter to our elected officials directly on our position on the lifting of the cap, as well as other elements of their proposal. So that's just something to keep in mind, that this letter would most likely be going straight to our elected officials. And just one other thing is that, aside from 5 boroughs housing movement and the presentation that they made today, it is very likely that this issue of the cap is not going away. And also, nor is the issue of conversion of office space. And so the more we can begin to put our voice on paper and our position on paper, I think will serve us well. We may need to continue to refine that as we learn more and hear more. But this is a topic that we know came up last year. The mayor has been very, I mentioned, they referred to this study, which I have here on my desk. There's been a lot of discussion. The mayor's been tweeting about these conversions. This is very much something that will not go away just with one 5 borough housing movement organization. Okay, with that, Paul.
All right, thanks, everybody. And those of you who did see the Hell's Kitchen Land Use Committee meeting, it was a very robust conversation. And so I want to address a couple of things before I move into the specifics of sort of our position. To address the first issue that Carrie just raised about 5 Borough Housing Commission, this organization. I mean, they came and they did this presentation, and their notion of conversion of office space, the removal of the cap, and the change of the tax incentives seemed reasonable. But there was a lot of question from our committee members about who this group was. And Tina, you touched on it a little bit. Who are they? How are they funded? What's really behind their motivation? And so we, as a committee, decided that we didn't want to have Community Board 4 send a letter to 5 Borough Commission for them to then throw our name onto that slideshow. You saw the group of all the people who have taken a position on this. And so we took the position that they didn't ask us specifically for a letter. They would have liked for us to support them, But because of the questions about who's behind them, what developers are with them, who's funding them, we would rather not have given the Community Board 4 name to them to have them use that in any way with elected officials to say something like, oh, Community Board 4 has taken a position with us, and throw our name into their mix. So we decided instead to go directly to our elected officials with our position on this. The second thing is that, as Jessica just pointed out, this is now the second year in a row where the governor has put forward a plan to remove the residential cap of 12 FAR. Last year, it kind of fell down and didn't happen. We had some pretty robust conversations at land use committees and executive committee, and I think it came up at Health and Human Services Committee last year, but the board didn't take a position. And we never sent a letter on where we stand on this issue. So the issue has now come up again, and this is an opportunity for us as a board to sort of have a conversation about where we stand on this and what we think is important. As Jessica also just pointed out, House 1 budget and Assembly, House 1 for Assembly and House 1 for Senate do not have the removal of the cap in their budgets. So the likelihood that this year the 12 FAR cap will be removed is less and less likely as these negotiations move forward. And I don't want us to be in the position we were last year where suddenly it's out of the budget and the board now still doesn't take a position. So we kind of, from Hell's Kitchen land use perspective, built from that premise that let's address our elected officials and let's say, if there are any conversations about removing this cap, these are the terms that we need to make sure are part of the conversations. So it isn't necessarily to say we support the removal or we deny the removal, but that if any conversations occur, that we need to make sure that we focus on the issues of livability and affordability in our housing stock. So within the letter we wrote as our draft to kind of merge in with Chelsea land use notions is that if there is any consideration of removing this cap, let's test it in some of the highly dense areas already, such as Hudson Yards, where they already have 18 to 33 FAR for commercial. Let's do some test pilot programs there. If there is, and Kerry raised this point in her questions, if there's any elimination of the cap in the city, that we have public infrastructure funding to support schools and fire and police and EMS and things like that that are necessary for residents to live in a livable community. We want to make sure that there was a lot of questions about the protection of the historic districts and the special districts. We need to make sure that here in Hell's Kitchen, the Clinton Special District is kind of a great example of how a special district can preserve a neighborhood. And if that is not protected, that really goes against the grain of all of that. Historic districts, as we know, West Chelsea and Special West Chelsea, the West Chelsea historic districts, those need to be protected before we can have any removal of this cap. And so we also want to make sure that these conversations about caps don't have the current stacking bonuses. Like if you go for rezoning, you get some additional FAR based on various things. That stacking bonus doesn't get out of control as well. And how do we control those discussions? And then, of course, as we always talk about, is that any of these issues has to include permanent, affordable, and a wide range of income bands. So we sort of took all of those points and said, if you're going to talk about a removal of the cap, these things need to be included in these conversations. And we need to make sure that the state still provides us some sort of backstop against unfettered development in the city if this cap were to be removed. So does that offer a good summary of things as people saw them?
Paul, are you saying that? the
Yeah,
backstop is-
I'm sorry. I should have put my hand up.
I guess I should have as well. Are you saying the backstop is these provisions that you just outlined, and that's like, or because they sound a little bit like suggestions? So are we writing it as if that is a deny unless?
We didn't use any language, deny unless, or vote in favor with conditions, or anything. We said any conversation about this has to include these these points. So it was not
Yeah.
necessarily a deny unless.
I'm asking because when I think about it and the response, like I'm feeling a little like this about, already hearing that Hudson Yards might be a pilot project, it's like that already got into the presentation for a week later. So I'm wondering like, for us to say like that it's not a deny unless, which I understand why, that's not the best language, but to say that we have to have a conversation around these things or a consideration, they could say, sure, we considered it and we decided no. You know what I mean? Like, I'm just being a little bit of a devil's advocate here.
No, I hear you totally, and I think you're right on that. The thing is that that we talked about Hudson Yards because right now there's an FAR residential cap of 6 FAR in Hudson Yards, and the commercial space has an FAR of 33. And that disparity means that we'll have towers of commercial with no residential. We won't have mixed use developments. We won't have a mixed use neighborhood. We'll have commercial towers and vacant streets at night. And so there's a combination of things that need to come into play. And I know from sitting on the Penn Station working group, those proposed buildings had FARs of 33, and the maximum number of housing units we could get at Penn Station was 1,800 units, which was too low. And so I think that the notion of saying if FAR cap is removed, it should only be done in places that have high density already in place. So that might be one of the ways of looking at that.
Yeah, I mean, it helps. I'm just wondering if the language that we use doesn't have to be more specific. Like we're not just consideration of these things, but I don't know. I'm not sure what the words would be.
Well, I think that we're saying don't consider anything unless. So the language that is in the draft letter at this point says, let me see if I can pull that up again right now. I just had it open, sorry.
Well, from my notes, Paul, I don't know what the draft said, but the way it was expressed at the meeting, Joe laid out these points, and he said that people were writing to elected should consider that, and each of these points was started out with the word consider. And that was it.
So the language that and Mike, the draft language was circulated. It says, we urge you to not consider any proposal unless the following requirements are included. That's the language that's currently in the draft.
Okay. And not only that, but it was also thought that with respect to Hudson Yards, at least, that only buildings that have an existing FAR that is 12 or better, should be considered for conversion. That was first point, and I thought about that some more, and it just unless there's permanent affordable housing attached to it, and if we've got a residential FAR of 6 in that area, I mean, this doesn't make much sense to me. So, what is the first paragraph of the draft letter then? How do you start the whole thing off?
Why don't I look that up while Dave asks his question?
Oh, you have that.
Yeah, and Dave and Mike, I think it should be in your inbox. So you should have.
Oh, no, I don't have it.
Carrie, did we not? I thought we circulated it to the committee. Was it not circulated? I thought it was circulated. I apologize, Mike. I thought it was circulated.
Oh, no. Okay.
We can get that. All right.
Yeah, Paul, if you can send it to me. I'm sorry, I don't think I saw it. Was it today?
No, I think I'll look where it is. Hold on.
It was yesterday. I'll send it to you.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. It just went through the 4 co-chairs, and Jesse was not on that list. It came from JD. Sorry.
But if I can, if everybody should read it or can read it because there's a preamble there that's useful. But it says the key paragraph here is while iterating the board's ongoing and robust commitment for creating and preserving affordable housing, voted to echo the committee's strong concerns about removing the residential cap and to urge you not to consider, bolded and underlined, not to consider any proposal unless the following requirements are included. And then they are enumerated. I'll just briefly say them here. A requirement for a substantial percentage of permanently mixed income affordable housing, a requirement to address infrastructure and services needed resulting from increased development, a require to exempt special districts, a requirement that any actions would not undercut specific bonus requirements in special zoning districts, and a requirement that the cap should only be removed only in an existing high density zone with existing commercial FARs from 18 to 33, in which the residential cap is limited to an FAR of 6, and only if there is an affordable housing component.
My apologies. I thought that this had been circulated, so I thought you had all had the chance to see it. Thank you for reading through those sections. Those really, and the letter does continue on with much more specifics about affordable housing, infrastructure needs, the definition of special districts, sort of a surgical application, and then so all of those points are then highlighted again with better definition to them.
Thanks, Paul. Dave?
Yeah, I hope you'll bear with me. I have a bunch of notes jotted down, and there may be some pauses while I make sure that I hit all my points. The first and most pragmatic one, the state budget will be resolved by April 1st. We're not going to have our full board meeting until April 4th. And I think this is something that we want to have Bell's Kitchen land use weigh in on, Chelsea land use, and Housing, Health, and Human Services weigh in on. So what we may be talking about is a resolution for next year. I don't know what we could put in place that's going to have any effect for this year, since it wouldn't be voted on by full board until after the budget is settled. That's point number one.
Sorry, just on that point, if we can, Jesse, there's an exec meeting on Monday. Is there a way to have this be if it is multiple committees to have this be, and I don't even know if we could get it turned around, so there's that issue, but could this go out from exec on Monday and then it changes the deadline issue or the timing issue that Dave is referencing? You're on mute, Jesse.
Operationally, yes. If you wanted to put this on exec agenda, you could, and the draft was ready, let's say by mid to last possibly would be the Friday, but yeah, you could do that.
I wouldn't want to see that. I don't think it gives us enough time for discussion among the committees. This is a very important issue. And in terms of the draft letter that was proposed by Hell's Kitchen Land Use, I have serious reservations about that. First of all, who is it who's supposed to be considering all of these stipulations? Are we talking about the state doing it or the city? Because it's the state's FAR cap to lift. And, the state isn't very much involved in the city's zoning. So we get the city to promise something based on the state lifting their cap. I don't know how that even works. And I'm very nervous about sending a message that seems like we're even open to lifting the 12 FAR cap on new construction, which makes no sense whatsoever. And part of the problem is that the idea of allowing office buildings that exceed the cap already to be converted to residential, which is a separate issue with its own logic, forms kind of a Trojan horse of reason that allows us to start sounding like we're open to raising the FAR cap in general, which I think would be a horrible mistake. There are a ton of reasons not to do it. As John said tonight, MIH, which is the whole hope of this thing, has only apparently produced about 1,000 units in all of 6 years. And for MIH to be triggered, a building has to exceed current zoning by about double. And there are arguments that can be made that areas in the city that have the least restrictions on building new housing, like Hudson Yards and Tribeca, are the ones where prices have gone up the most. We see that right here in Chelsea, where there's been a huge amount of housing that's been allowed to be built, much of it very tall along the High Line. It's all astronomically expensive, and it's even affected the cost of new housing outside of that district near where I live. I'm in a 71 unit, 10-story building, 25 feet away, a building with half the frontage and 2 more stories was recently built that has only 10 units, which on average have sold for $15 million. I think that there's a kind of a delusion that lifting the cap is going to result in a lot more affordable housing being built, or even if it's more luxurious housing being built, there's more housing in general, and that's going to trickle down to lower prices. Andrew Berman has put online a YouTube video called "Why Are We Pushing Public Housing Policies That Harm Affordability and Preservation?" which I encourage everyone to watch. It's full of data and illustrations that completely debunk the notion that eliminating the FAR cap of 12 is going to be helpful in any way. You know, one thing to bear in mind is that the super talls on 57th Street have an FAR of 10. I really don't see, you know, we're talking about raising the limit on office conversions to buildings that were built up to 1990. When you're talking about Hudson Yards, you're talking about office buildings that haven't even been built yet. You know, there's no argument in terms of sustainability behind that. There's no consideration in MIH or raising the FAR cap of traditional zoning virtues in residential neighborhoods like light and air. Even with the FAR of 12, you know, buildings have setback requirements, a 30-foot rear setback requirement up to 125 feet, after which it's 50. They've got deductions for chases. You're talking about 20 plus buildings, 20-story plus buildings already if they're an FAR of 12. We're throwing that light and air out the window. We're kind of mandating all new construction in Manhattan, where developers only want to build luxury anyway, that's going to be 70 to 80% luxury housing that's going to be astronomically expensive. And that is going to bring up the area median income, which, by the way, isn't based just on New York City housing costs. It's based on suburbs outside the city. So it's already elevated. And, you know, the city could artificially lower that. They could say that, you know, the percentage of area median income has to be lower. Well, that just takes away an incentive from developers to build this stuff because they still want to make a profit. None of it makes any sense. And, you know, we should be very strongly stating to the electeds that we don't want this cap removed. And the way it reappears every single year is not as something that's open to discussion. It's the FAR cap stays or it goes away. And that's what's before our legislators right now. And we want to tell them we want it to stay. This whole idea of you know, it's okay to discuss it if these things are taken into account. We haven't done a thorough enough analysis of what the implications are, which I think could be very, very destructive. I mean, for one thing, it puts a target on the back of existing affordable housing that's in historic buildings. If you can all of a sudden build much more than what is there, well, developers are going to tear down affordable housing to put up these super high-rise buildings where they can really cash in. Andrew Berman gives an example of buildings at Lower Fifth Avenue. Pamela is familiar with these buildings. And it was 14 to 16 Fifth Avenue, 4.5-story landmark buildings. The Landmarks Commission allowed them to be demolished. They had 20 units, 10 of which were rent stabilized. They have now been replaced by a 10-story building with only 21 units. None of them are affordable. That's the kind of thing that getting rid of the FAR cap is just going to throw gasoline on. I mean, it encourages the demolition of existing affordable housing. That's kind of what it comes down to. So, I am really not for this letter that was proposed by Hell's Kitchen Land Use. I don't think that anything that we might squeeze out of Hudson Yards is worth it. I think Hudson Yards zoning needs to be revisited separately. This whole removal of the FAR cap seems to be a big initiative of the real estate industry. And, I'm really not comfortable with making it sound like we're at all open to eliminating it.
If I can take a minute to go through that list. Is that all right, Justin, Carrie? So,
I mean, I'm interested. I'm sort of wondering if we should hear from Pamela and Mike and then
okay.
respond. But if
all right, yeah, I suspect we'll hear. Okay, good.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. First of all, everything David just said. Second of all, this just seems to me like the world's slipperiest slope. If you open the door a tiny bit and say, well, maybe, but you got to do this, that opens the door, period. My brain doesn't wrap around all of this stuff very well. I apologize for that. You are all seem to be much more able to handle the numbers and the concept, really. But what I want to know, here I am in the middle of Chelsea between 7th and 8th Avenues on 21st Street. When the Chelsea zoning plan came into effect, I felt wonderfully protected, even though I'm not in the historic district. What we gave away in that plan was between 5th and 7th Avenues and 10th Avenue to the river. We protected our middle of Chelsea with that plan. What happens now to that? Do I expect that the 5-story, 30-unit building across the way from me will be taken down and turned into a 10-story building in mid-block in Chelsea? What happens? What nightmare is in front of us when we lose that building, which is filled with rent stabilized and affordable units? And we lose that and it turns into a condo towering over the other buildings in the neighborhood and stealing my sunlight. Can someone respond to that?
Well, I think we're going to take some comments and then Paul can do his best to respond to some of these. I mean, again, I think, and Jesse now just put the letter in the Dropbox. So if anyone, we can either do a shared screen or if people can pull it up on their own. But I do think that the recommendations of the letter are not for, they're not for a blanket removal of the cap, which would invite what you're describing, I think. But let's hear from Mike and then Paul can respond. Mike?
First of all, I hear you, Pamela. I totally agree with you. And I think last year when we spoke about the lifting the cap, I think that the sentiment was, it just wasn't something that should apply to the city of New York, Manhattan at least. It is totally at odds with so many of the puzzle pieces here. You would have to go through everything to see where it's going to impact. And we haven't done that. Nobody's really done that. And David might have a point, we weren't asked to write a letter. And since the one House and one Senate budgets don't cover it anyway, I'm not so worried about it anymore. I'm not so sure. I don't know if it's on Tuesday when they're going to have a big, the first big meeting on this with Governor. I don't remember, but it is unlikely, I think, that this happens this year. And if we don't have to put our 2 cents in, well, I suggest we don't. And by the way, anybody who has not seen Andrew Berman's lecture, I encourage you to do it. Please do. It will wake you up and show you how these concepts are thrown around so liberally that people lose sight of the fact of what really is at hand. It's a mind blower. It really is. That lecture is something else, and it will tell you that we might be just going along with the flow again, and I don't want to do that. There's so
Thank you,
much
Mike.
more, so much more to consider here.
Thank you. Betty?
Hi, I'll try to be real quick. It's very dark out now, by the way. I really like that the Clinton Hell's Kitchen Land Use Committee is not writing to the 5 borough housing movement. I was very concerned that they didn't reveal very clearly who they were in terms of their partnerships, and that the property owners were one of their partners. So that made me very suspicious. And then I think it would be good that we have some kind of letter. I like the idea of a letter to the electeds, and I think we should do that. I don't think we should not say anything, and that some of the points raised tonight from Chelsea Land Use, I think are very valid, and that maybe stronger statements of negative, we oppose the change of the cap and so on, should be in the letter, and we shouldn't be sort of poking around. We should be more definitive. So I'm afraid, Paul, you have some possible, changes you have to make to the letter, in my mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Betty. I do want to let Paul respond to some of those comments, but Carrie, do you want to say something before he does?
Yeah, I think that I don't think that Clinton Hell's Kitchen Land Use thought that Chelsea Land Use would be like a wholesale yes. So I think we are prepared to try to come to, some kind of agreement together to represent both. And I think we're pretty close to each other in how we feel about this. And so let me just ask a question, because, sorry, this is for my own education as much as to put it out there, but it feels like everybody is very interested in conversion of commercial buildings into residential buildings. And it feels like everybody is very opposed to lifting the cap wholesale, like unilaterally. So I'm just wondering if we shouldn't be maybe having a discussion about how to say yes to, part A and no to part B. Because I'm not sure we're addressing and maybe it's 2 different letters, or maybe it's 2 completely different conversations, but I'm not sure that we're addressing the positive, sentiment that we all have around trying to make more affordable housing out of potentially redeveloping commercial buildings into residential buildings. But I'm with you, Betty, Dave, Pamela, Mike, I feel very uncomfortable about just saying maybe.
Yeah. So, Carrie, I think that's a good launching pad for this, because one of the really big important issues that came up at Hell's Kitchen Land Use was that any restriction on lifting the cap would be limited to lifting the cap for commercial currently over 12 and including a mandatory affordable component, right? So that was one of our first bullet of our discussion. So to say that we would want to shift the focus of the letter a little bit to say, look at, we want the cap to be lifted for conversion of commercial space only, and to ensure that there's an inclusion of affordable unit, permanently affordable housing in that conversion. I think that language would go over well with, perception of Hell's Kitchen land use committee discussion, and I think it would go well across the full board. We need to get a full board vote on this as well. So to maybe shift the focus of the letter a little bit to start there, and then to say any further consideration of a removal of a cap needs to include these things, and we shouldn't consider it unless these other conditions are in place. So the reason that, and David, I see you shaking your head saying no, but you asked the question and I'm going to answer it. David was shaking his head. As I said that, David was violently shaking his head no. And so
Sorry, can I add something to that, Paul, or can I just ask for a clarification?
Yeah.
Because that's interesting. We would still want to have all of the other conditions in place, correct?
Well, and here's the reason why, and I want to go through a bunch of these points that David and Pam and Mike all raised as part of the context for this, right? The question was asked about what role does the state have in city regulations? And the fact is that they don't have a role in the city regulations, except for this 12 FAR cap that exists. And the language they're looking at is to remove the cap for any cities over 1 million, which means, as Carrie, you pointed out to John, it only impacts New York City, right? So what they're saying is we're going to remove the cap at the state level, and then the city has to figure this all out. But what I think what I'm hearing from this is that the state shouldn't just universally remove the cap. The state needs to act as a backstop for us still. I mean, the concern that I'm hearing kind of running through a lot of this is that the city won't protect our neighborhoods if we don't have some sort of state protection in place. So to say that if the cap is removed, and by using the language of cap is only removed for conversion of commercial space, that might be a step they take this year. It may not be, but this conversation comes up year after year after year. And we always say, and Mike, this goes back to your point about I don't want to go with the flow. The problem is that last year we went through this, and then we said we need more time to discuss this and deliberate on this, and then it fell out of the budget, and then we didn't talk about it again until this month when it's back in the budget and we're back under that pressure deadline. So the notion of having a letter that says this is where we stand on these issues today, none of that is going to happen today. And Pam, this goes to your point. If they remove the cap today, nothing changes until the city makes changes to the zoning, and they have to go through a zoning process to change anything. So my feeling is that by having all of these conditions in our letter to the state today, I mean, like this month or whatever, whenever it can get approved, right? That we're saying, look at no language of changing a cap, no movement to change the cap should not be done without considering these pieces of it. So when it moves to the city, and the city is now having these conversations, we're already on record and saying these are our most important issues that we need to protect, right? We need our historic districts protected. We need our special districts protected. So now the state has said we're going to remove the cap, and it comes to the city for a zoning review. We are now already on record in advance to say this can't happen unless these things are met. We need public infrastructure, we need protectors, all those points that we raised. So I think that to shift the focus slightly of this letter to say, the focus, and look at, let me say another thing on my personal perspective on this with this 5 boroughs housing commission. Last year there was just the talk about removing the cap, and that was just put forward and then it got bounced out. Now they're finding a nuanced way of getting this cap removal language included, because there seems to be a consensus that we should convert commercial space into residential. There's a great movement for that. The city is pushing for it. Everyone's on it. So now they're sticking this in there, right? And so it's a way of wheedling in this removal of the cap in a clever way with a front group, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what happened, Paul. That's exactly how it happened.
So I think that next year it's going to be even more clever. And the year after, it's going to be even more clever than that until this gets taken away. And I think it's important for us as a board to take a position and say, this is where we stand on this cap. And with all due respect to David, there are some people on this board who say, let's remove the cap. Let's explore this. Let's do this. So not everybody is anti-cap removal. And so we want to find a way to kind of bring it forward, that make sure that we protect ourselves against, as I say, unfettered development. So David, in terms of the time, you raised the question about the timeline, right? Like the state budget is April 1. As has been pointed out, this cap removal is not in House 1 budget for either Senate or Assembly. Forecast is this cap is not going to be removed this year. So we are now having these conversations about this. Let's produce a document that records what we're talking about and what positions we take. And you're right, I think it's going to be more of an impact on next year. I don't think it's going to impact this year's decision. I think it's going to be an impact on next year's decision. But if it does get removed, we want to make sure that at least the conversion to commercial is the only restriction. If they can say remove the cap only in cities over 1 million people, why can't they say remove the cap only for conversion of commercial? Like just add another sentence in there and make it simple without complication. If they don't do it this year, we now have another year to build up better arguments for other conditions. As I say, the question on lifting the cap on new construction, there are some people on this board who would support lifting the cap for new construction, notably in the high dense areas of Hudson Yards and Penn Station. So I'm not sure that, you know, we can say unilaterally we oppose the removal of the cap. I agree that the MIH program is problematic, and I think that we have to address that MIH issue separately from the cap discussion. And notably, I think we need to address the AMI formulas, which, you know, as David, you pointed out, AMI for Westchester County is not AMI for Bronx. And so that formula needs to be addressed and fixed somehow. But I'm not conflating it with this cap. The interesting thing about you, David, you raised the super talls. You're right, they are only 10 FAR, but there was no requirement for affordability in those. And I think that's something we want to push for, is that we insist on permanent affordability in anything that goes over 12 FAR. So I think that we need to maybe put that in place. The residential zoning issues that protect us now against light and air issues, those residential zoning language would still be in place, even with a over 12 FAR cap. Over 12 FAR, the residential zoning would still be in place, that has setbacks and all those other things. How a developer would fit 12 FAR onto a site with all those other constraints in place, I don't know how they do it, but maybe we need to start thinking through that a little bit more, like what would happen in those places. David and Pam, I think this is really critical, that we need to make sure to protect the historic districts. And again, you know, I've been pushing for this for a long time, that one of the ways we need to do that is maybe start in implementing zoning language in those historic districts to restrict FAR. David, you and I have talked about a 3 FAR cap in historic districts. You know, this could give us the opportunity to do that in the next year before these 12 FAR caps are eliminated. So let's use this time effectively to get that done. And I think that was the list. So I think that the notion of shifting the focus of the letter to say, if the conversion of office space, we're seeing a call and a demand for that. We have overbuilt commercial space, and so to remove the cap to allow for conversion of overbuilt commercial might be a good starting point. And then to say, if any further discussion around removing this cap occurs, it needs to include these other points. And as I say, this year, it doesn't look like it's going to happen anyway. So it's a way for us to get on record for that.
Pam and then Betty.
Still sounds like a slippery slope to me. It sounds like the road to hell. I'm still concerned. For one thing, I forgot to say, I don't think that this should be handled with a letter to that exec should be doing that. I think it is too important, and I think the full board needs to be able to have an opportunity to respond. I would like to hear what everybody has to say, including the people who that you mentioned, Paul, who might well be in favor of lifting the cap. That's democracy for you. I just think it's a terrible idea.
Can I
think we need to-
agree? Can I agree,
to
Pam? I do
Pull
think,
ourselves together and gird our loins and stick to our guns and say what we really mean and not lift that cap, not
Yeah,
open the door.
and Pam, I agree, it is a slippery slope. And look at, I just used language and I saw a lot of head nodding on removing the cap to allow for the conversion of overbuilt commercial space. And I saw a lot of heads nodding because there is a call for utilization of underutilized commercial space and converting it to residential. And people say that.
Absolutely. There needs to be another way to get there.
But yeah, so, I think that, again, year after year, this removal of the 12 FAR cap keeps coming up. And if we can say no to that every time, and then it will happen without us participating in putting our conditions in place.
Can
And
we say no to
that's what
that?
I'm more afraid of. I'm afraid of that slippery slope leaving us to the sidelines.
Could we not just say no to that and then say, find another way to do this, to convert those commercial buildings to residential with lots of, there has to be another way to get there.
Betty?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting question what Pam raises, because I'm very ambivalent about this cap thing, even with the conditions, and maybe there's some way to put, we reluctantly, if it has to be, or as the majority want it, then you have to have these requirements. But regarding those requirements, I don't like saying in any of the language, affordable housing has to be a component of it, because they could give you 2 affordable units. Usually we have a percent, like 30%, 40%. So I feel that wherever we say in our letter, there has to be at least some kind of range of percents, because they could just have 5 units, and they said, oh, okay, we have an affordable component. So that I feel pretty seriously about. And I'm very uncomfortable having exec send this thing out and the full board not discussing it.
Can I just, Betty, I just want to respond to that affordability determination. And, like the MIH plans, they have 3 different ranges of affordability that you can put into MIH buildings. And, for us to say we want affordability up to 165% AMI, there are other parts of the city that they don't want the numbers to be that high. And so our ranges are different than their ranges. So hard to get a citywide or even a
No, I wasn't talking about AMIs. I was only talking about the percent of units which out of the total units of a residential building, it would say it's converted from an office building. To leave that totally open, I'm not talking about.
Oh, I see. Okay, all right. I'm sorry. The MIH standard is 30%. So we could put that kind of language.
Maybe you could do that, at least 30%.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Marty?
I didn't expect you to jump to me. Okay, thank you.
Sorry.
I feel, having listened to this, that I shouldn't just sit quietly, and you should, at least I should respond to some of it. Remove the 12 AMI, as I understood it. Without removing the 12 AMI, there will still be some commercial that could get converted. So
I'm sorry, Marty, you said 12 AMI. I'm sorry, I need clarification. I'm sorry.
12 FAR.
You mean
Oh, 12,
FAR.
he's okay. All right, sorry.
all this alphabet stuff gets me flummoxed. Sorry. Removing the 12, not removing the 12, not AMI.
FAR.
FAR, thank you. If you don't remove it, there'll still be some commercial, could still be some commercial conversion, which would need some encouragement to have affordable. That's the first thing I wanted to mention. The second is that I'm with Pam. My brain doesn't take all this complexity on the fly very well, and I need to bathe in it some. I haven't even seen the letter that you're talking about. I hear you talking about it, and so the complexity, I would find it very difficult to take a position here. But if I'm forced to take a position, I will oppose any letter that doesn't start with Community Board 4 opposes the removal of the 12. And if the 12 is removed, then these are the conditions that we would want. Anything less than that, I will vote against.
I just want to go to,
I prefer not a letter at all, actually, at this point. I think this discussion is helpful and I'm learning a whole bunch of stuff. But I think we have a lot more to talk about.
yeah, I do want to note that we are hearing and again seeing head nods around being in favor of commercial conversion. And so seeing as that's on the table, I think there's something maybe there to discuss, recognizing and potentially a letter recognizing that the other committee may choose to, also put a letter, and the folks here as board members are free to vote as they wish on that letter. But and I know, Dave, I see your hand up, but I'd like to go to Hector because we haven't heard from him yet. So Hector.
Thank you. I have a quick question. Maybe I missed something, but is there a deadline to submit this letter? I mean, for it to even matter?
No, I mean, I think this is a, as Dave pointed out, that this has come through now 2 committees. It can go to full board next month, and then it'll be addressed to the state elected officials such that, we can begin the conversation for the next year. Because we did go through this last year, and there was a lot of these sorts of conversations about this is a hefty discussion. We need to have more robust conversations. Let's bring it up at another point. And then it never came back up again until now. So Marty, with due respect to you, I think that, let's get a letter on record. It's not going to be this will not be our final position on this, I can assure you, because it's not going away.
Yeah. So, I mean, the reason I bring that up is that I understand that we want to get it before the full board meeting, but we're all, myself, I watched the video and I'm just starting to grasp the scope of it. And it seems to me that in all other places like Austin, Texas, where FARs are pretty much non-existent, or they just, in some areas, the FARs have been removed entirely. And they were allowed to build, crazy heights and buildings and on disregard for any kind of FARs. That basically it did not supply any affordable housing from what the numbers I saw. I mean, I could be wrong, but that's what I saw coming out of that video. So I think for myself, I need a lot more time to really learn a lot of this stuff before I could commit to such a letter saying that, I agree that this year they may not vote on it and it probably won't get approved and we still have a little time. And I do understand you want to get a letter on record, but I think we need a little bit more knowledge behind it for myself, and I don't know if anybody else, before we could commit to such a thing.
Well, Hector, I would agree 100% that the examples used in Andrew Berman's presentation about other cities, I've been using the term unfettered development, right? Those cities did not have affordability requirements in their building code. So that, one of the things we want to do is make sure that if this cap is lifted, that there is a mandatory, and, Betty's saying 30% of the units are required to be affordable. We have had conversations, I remember last year there was an issue raised that anything over 12, from 12 to 18 FAR would have to have 40% affordable, and from 18 to 30 would have to have 50% affordable. So there'd be even ranges of the number of units of affordability over a certain FAR, right? So up to 12, you could do 30%, but over 12, you have to do 40%. Up to, so sort of marginal increases in the number of affordable units is another thing that we could dig deeper into, that I think that comes at the city level, less so at the state level, right? Like our city regulations are what are going to drive what actually gets built. The state.
And without getting into the AMIs, because I know you mentioned it before that AMIs and Yonkers is different from what's in the Bronx or or Manhattan. So and it varies, and it shouldn't. I don't know. It shouldn't really be that way. I think because honestly, what the affordability they consider here is insane.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
$3,000 for a studio. I mean, that's nonsense.
I know,
But
I have to make you have to make $100,000 to live in a $2,500 studio.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Exactly. So, and I know we can't address that right away. That's a bigger issue, but that is something we definitely got to consider here because I mean, I know we're talking about getting affordability in these buildings, but when the numbers are so high, it's almost negligible, really. I mean, does it really make that big an impact at the end of the day when people in the city that live here and work here can't really afford it? I mean, we have cops and we have firemen and teachers who can't afford to live in the city because of those very AMIs,
Well,
But,
yeah, you're right. Let's go to Health and Housing Services Committee for that discussion. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Hector.
Thank you.
Well, let's hear from you. And then if there's anyone who hasn't spoken, now's your chance.
Yeah, I do not see the need to send this letter right now. I understand, Paul, your argument that we should get on record, but we can get on record in April or May or June when there's been more time to consider this. A letter now is not going to have any effect on what happens in the state legislature. We've conceded that. And otherwise, I think just to get this done so it could be at the April board meeting is rushing this when there are still too many questions and too many people are uncomfortable with this. So I would advocate not sending a letter at all right now and working on this instead of waiting till March of 24 to address this at the last minute again, like we did last year and we're doing now. We continue to work on it. I don't know whether it needs a task force or some kind of, structured meeting schedule. I know Jesse's rolling his eyes at that. To actually hash this through the three committees, but I don't see the urgency for doing this now. And getting on record in June would be just as effective as it would be doing it now. So I support not sending any letter at all.
Dave?
First of all, I couldn't agree more with Lowell. Paul, you mentioned those who might be in favor of lifting the cap. I'm not sure that all of us have been educated enough. And, we're just scratching the surface of all the discussion we could have, which to me is more reason not to do a letter right now. I wish everyone on the board could watch Andrew Berman's presentation before we go further. And I'm open to any information anyone has in support of MIH. I think we need to educate ourselves. And I'm concerned about taking a little bit of a defeatist stance by already saying if the FAR cap of 12 is lifted, then these should be things so that we're on record almost as if we're anticipating that we're going to lose it. I don't think we should be playing defense at this point. And there's a lot of talk about, well, this will give the city home rule. If the state takes away the FAR cap of 12. Well, the problem with that is that this is also the real estate industry city. And, they're going to be pushing for upzonings all over the place without a cap. Imagine how big those towers on Billionaires Row would be, even if they included an affordable component, if they were twice the FAR. So I'm absolutely in favor of not writing any letter now, but doing something between now and next year where we have a robust discussion and lots of information and perhaps outside experts addressing us.
Would someone
Thank you,
share the
Dave.
link to Berman's presentation with all of us, please?
Jesse, is there any chance you could do that?
It was mailed out to the entire committee over the weekend.
Yeah, I think David sent it out. David, was it you who sent it out over the weekend?
David sent it out to the entire committee over the
Yes,
weekend.
and I understand that may have been inappropriate of me, but it could be more official at this point.
Yes, we can
Um,
definitely share that with the committee.
Jesse, do you wanna give your hand up? I'm not sure if we need a vote on this or.
Well, I think I was writing about it. I think the easiest way to go about this right now, and you all can tell me if I'm wrong, but is that one committee has voted on a letter to recommend a letter, and that's the Clinton Hell's Kitchen Land Use Committee. And so that letter, the draft we put into your Dropbox, is what is being worked on and will be eventually, I think, could be provided to the full board. And so if there is, I think the easiest way to say if there is enough if there's a majority vote here to join in that letter with conditions, with any other conditions that you all want, then that's one way. If there's not enough of a majority, the majority is to not participate involving in that letter, then that letter just goes forward. And then
Yeah, I agree. So I think what we're hearing though is
you all
that
can
this
figure out what
group,
you want to do afterwards.
right, no, well, I think if I'm, and we can open it back up, but I think what we're hearing is potentially that this group is not comfortable signing on with that letter, recognizing that that committee has voted on that letter and it will be presented to full board. But does this group need to do anything, take a vote in any way to say that it is not issuing a letter at this time? Or we just heard a presentation, we had a discussion, we're choosing to take no action at this time. And in fact, we can move on to the next. We don't need a motion to move on to the next item. We rather can just conclude this discussion knowing we're going to take it up in further discussion with, or maybe without, the other committee or others across the board.
You do not need to make a motion if you're not writing a letter. So if we're not joining on to the Clinton Hell's Kitchen land use letter, and there's not a consensus of what to be writing a letter on right now, and that we want to take more time, then that's no motion is needed. And there we go.
Got it. Okay, Lowell and then Marty.
I disagree with what Jesse just said. This letter was drafted by Clinton Hell's Kitchen Land Use, but it was intended, my understanding, to be a joint letter from both committees.
Just on that though, if you listen to the meeting, and Paul obviously can speak to this in greater detail, but they wrote this letter. They indicated a letter for the purpose of their committee and expressed in a hope that this would align with this committee's like sentiment, but it was not passed with the idea that it would only go forward.
But Jessica, I understand that it would not, that their intent was not, well, we'll only go to the full board with this if CLU agrees, which is why I disagree with what Jesse just said. And if it's appropriate, I would make a motion that we vote, against the draft letter. Instead of saying don't vote a letter, I say I move that we vote on the Clinton Hell's Kitchen land use letter and suggest very strongly voting no against that letter. Because that way, when it goes back to full board, it's not just, hey, CLU discussed this and they didn't want to take a position. We are affirmatively against. Can you be affirmatively against something? We are affirmatively against the sending of that letter.
Happy to second that motion.
If it's appropriate, if
May I
it's
ask a
appropriate and the
question?
chairs will entertain it, I move that we vote on that Clinton Hell's Kitchen land use letter and vote, and my personal vote is that we vote no on it.
May I ask a question, please? Clarifying question. Why do we have to vote on, like, that letter is only presented to us in courtesy? It's not official. So wouldn't we make that statement at full board? And wouldn't we rather, if that's what the committee votes to approve, denial, a letter to our elected saying that we do not, we flat out say no to the lifting of the FAR cap.
Here's my
I'm
problem.
not sure why we're voting on Clinton Hell's Kitchen land use.
I
letter.
understand
They're
your
not.
question, Carrie. My issue is that the Clinton Hell's Kitchen land use letter is going to go to full board on April 4th or whatever the hell it is. And I would rather, given my feelings about it personally, and what I'm hearing from this discussion, I would rather take a much stronger stance than, hey, we discussed it, we didn't want to take a position, or we're voting out a contrary letter. I think we have something in front of us and we can say, no, we do not support this. It may be strictly advisory for, Clinton Hell's Kitchen land use to know that their brethren downtown don't agree with them. But I think when it goes to full board, it will present our position in a much stronger fashion to be able to stand up and say, well, we considered this letter and we don't like it. And that's why I think we do need a vote, because
And
when
just
if
I
the
would-
other letter,
Process,
Marty,
so-
if the other letter was not going to full board and Paul would represent that Clinton Hell's Kitchen land use will withdraw that letter, I don't think we need a vote. But if that letter is going to full board, I think we need to have a position on it.
I think you want to add to what you were saying. This is, I'm trying to be friendly. You can tell me I'm not. That there's so much information here that CLU feels it's necessary to schedule further discussions to delve into these issues more deeply, and therefore we're voting against the letter.
I am fine with that statement, Marty.
I wanted to say something else. I put my hand up before Lowell spoke. The Andrew Berman, I found it. You did send it out over the weekend, and then I just found it. It's an hour and a half presentation. Is it worth seeing the whole damn thing?
You can fast
Yes.
forward through some segments.
The answer is yes.
Okay, sorry, Jesse, a process question.
Thanks for the guidance.
Lowell's suggestion, we didn't have this letter on our agenda. It was a presentation from 5 boroughs, not a presentation from Clinton Hell's Kitchen. Can we, I don't know, just substantively, does that change that we would vote on a letter for something that wasn't, it wasn't the letter that was presented on?
Jessica, to clarify what I'm saying, I'm not, I'm using that as a straw man to some extent. I mean, we could just as easily take a vote and say, we don't agree with any of the, we want to write a letter, and everywhere it says yes in that letter, just change it to a no. I just think in expediency and for understanding, the easiest way to do it is to say, we do not support the Clinton Hell's Kitchen land use letter. And if you want to structure it a different way, I'm open to that. But I agree with Marty that, and I think David said it earlier and Pamela said it earlier, that this needs a lot more time to cook.
So, I'm certainly, we're through the looking glass a little bit here. The 5 borough presentation was informational. I think there was a desire to have a joint statement made by both land uses on this topic. If the consensus of this committee is not to support the letter, we can vote on that. That would be I guess the equivalent of a report from Jessica and or Carrie, at exec, and then probably the full board to say that the CLU committee is voted in opposition of sending the letter. And that would be it. I mean, you're not writing a separate letter. So that would be the consent. That would be what I think Lowell is suggesting to roll out.
So we're not voting on a letter. We're just voting to say that we do not agree with their letter. And then we would make that vote known to the rest of the board.
Well, Carrie, to add Marty's friendly amendment to that, The reason we are doing so is we think this needs more time to cook,
Right.
although no one's
Yes,
actually
and I-
seconded my motion yet.
Yes.
Sorry, yes, we should address the motion. So Lowell made a motion.
I did actually. I seconded it.
Right. Lowell made a motion to write a letter that states that we do not agree with the Clinton House Kitchen land use.
Not a
letter.
letter, Carrie.
Not
I'm
writing a
not,
letter.
not suggesting we write a letter. I'm suggesting that we make an advisory vote that we do not support the Clinton House Kitchen land use letter because it needs more time to cook.
Okay,
Not to
so
write a separate
you
letter.
did-
I
you
was
did make a
offering
motion
that.
to
I was
write a
offering.
letter, but I just want to make sure that we're clear then. So
I
would you
would consider
restate
this
your
an
motion, please?
advisory vote. I was just responding to Jessica's question about, do we need to write something? If we wanted to write something, we could. I don't think it's necessary. I'm
Great.
okay with the two of you going back to full board saying the committee voted and they hate this letter.
Great, Lowell, can you just make your motion again then, please?
Yes, my motion is that we take an advisory vote on the Clinton Hell's Kitchen land use letter. I'll leave my own personal feeling out of this. That's my motion, that we make a vote, that we vote on that letter. And well, I guess Marty did make the friendly amendment, so I have to amend that. We're an advisory vote that this committee does not agree with the contents of the Clinton Hell's Kitchen land use letter and would not want that letter sent because we need more time to investigate, discuss, and learn about these issues. And Marty claims he seconded that motion.
Betty, is that a second or a question?
No, it's a comment. I wanted to make a comment that I think just to be a little more comfortable that we make our advisory statement, whether it's verbal or written, to say that there's a consensus on the committee, our committee, that we need more time to evaluate the issues. And therefore, we don't support any letter going from Community Board 4.
I will accept Betty's flipping of the wording of that as a friendly amendment. So now the motion is that we believe we need more time and thus we do not support the Clinton Hell's Kitchen land use letter.
You know, I think there's another issue that two other committees should have been involved in their discussion. And in fact, in Hell's Kitchen's discussion at one point, JD said, well, you know, we need to include Chelsea land use. And Paul, I think you kind of made an assumption out loud in that meeting that Chelsea would agree with the letter.
I did not hear that. I did not.
No, I absolutely would not say that, David. I would never
that's
say
not
that I would presume the position of this committee.
Paul-
Let me be
Paul
clear
knows
on that.
Well, you may have
Paul
said,
knows better than
assuming Chelsea follows.
I
agrees
assume
with
that
us,
I
but-
assume the Chelsea Land Use Committee would want to be involved in this discussion. And that's what I may have said, but I would never have declared a position, as I can't say to you now, I can't say Hell's Kitchen Land Use can rescind this letter because I don't represent the entirety of the committee. I would
Right,
never
but I think
presume or
the
assume. this
discussion
committee takes a
was
position.
inappropriate for not including Chelsea and Housing, Health and Human Services, which is another reason for us to oppose the letter before the full board. And I'd like that to be
We have
included
a
in the
motion
letter.
and a second. So unless there's some conversation around the motion,
I raised my hand for comment on the motion.
Okay, but I actually did not hear Marty second it for the restated, so just for process, can we get that, Marty? If that's from you or from someone else?
Marty, raise your hand. Or someone else. David, somebody help me out here.
Yes, I'm happy with the rephrasing. If the seconder needs to say that, I'm saying that.
Thank you. Okay, so now we're in discussion. So Paul, go ahead.
Thanks. I don't know if Murnal had a comment on the motion. His hand was up before mine, but in terms of the motion.
Sorry.
Oh,
I
go
was
ahead,
just
Murnal.
gonna say, I mean, we're making a reference to a letter that some of us haven't even read. I mean, can we use language that does not reference, the said letter?
Yeah, I think where we netted out, thank you for, where we netted out is that, and it was in part Betty's suggestion, the start, like, we need more time. And so we are not ready to endorse a position on this. And it sounded like we got to a place of And we don't advise that the board take a position until more time has been devoted to exploring this issue.
That's
Good.
exactly
That
correct.
would be fine. That would be
That's
fine.
good.
Okay.
All right,
So-
so my position on that is I do, Hell's Kitchen Land Use, Jessica's right. Hell's Kitchen Land Use did vote to issue a letter. The goal was to have a joint, both land use committees be in support of this, and I'm disappointed to hear that Chelsea Land Use is not in support of this. We have spent many months and many hours talking about this issue. It has come before both land use committees twice. It has come before HHSS once. It has come before Executive Committee once. And a year has passed that we have had these conversations and the board has not issued a position. And for me, this is me personally, less so as co-chair of any committee, but even from this, as a member of this committee, I think it's important that this board start to lay down some language about what should happen in the case that the state removes the 12 FAR cap. And I think that we as a board need to start thinking about this and not just having committee discussions, not just having we have had a number of robust conversations about this. And just because we don't all agree on all of the specific language, I think it's a disservice to our community to not take a position and stand on it and say, we recognize that this trend is moving and this is a slippery slope we're going down. And these are, I'm using the language that a lot of you have used, that this is problematic. And we face a problem, and we as a board have not issued a statement on this.
Mr. Devlin,
Well,
I was not suggesting in
wanted
my
to-
motion, Mr. Devlin, that the board
Yeah.
not take a position. What I said is I specifically said we should absolutely take a position before we get to March 2024.
This is exactly
And sorry,
but
Paul
this is
and Lowell,
exactly
excuse
the
me,
language we
excuse
heard
me.
last year too. And it
I
didn't.
hear you, but that's actually not a comment on the motion. So I think it's an important discussion to have, but if there are no more comments on the motion, then I think we want to take this to a vote. So
Well, it was on the motion because I'm urging people not to vote in favor of this motion.
Call
I'm
the
urging you to
question.
join us.
Call the question.
Can everybody take their hand down? I got you, Betty. Don't worry about it.
Now, keep in mind, my motion is to say no. So when you're voting yes, you're voting no.
Wait, say that again.
What?
The motion is to say no letter. So when you vote yes in support of the motion, you are voting no to the letter. It's a little bit backwards,
so
but
if you are in
I want to
favor
make
of the
sure everyone
motion,
knows it.
you are voting that we are saying we need more time to discuss this and to join with other committees to have a more formal, like a more thorough and thought out process regarding our position on this topic.
That's the positive way to say it. So you can vote yes to say what
Exactly.
Jessica just
That was
said.
the intent.
Yeah, I'm just a negative Nancy. What can I tell you?
Can for the vote of this, just because I think it's important, can we do, I would like us to do the raise hand function. So, and not have to worry about people's.
Okay. All in
lowering.
favor of the motion, raise your hand.
Wait a minute.
It appears to be everyone except Mr. Devlin.
Shocking,
Thank
Lowell.
you, Lowell.
Thank you,
those
Thank you for pointing
against?
that out.
And thanks, Paul, for presenting all of that information. And honestly, I don't want that to go unsaid.
Thank you.
Let's just
No,
take our
it-
hands down if you haven't already and just finalize this.
I got you, Pam. Betty.
And Pamela.
Thank
okay,
you.
those against?
All those opposing the letter.
We're doing it, okay?
Got you, Paul.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Is
I
it
think
too
that's
too late
everyone.
to suggest that the letter also includes something about the three committees ought to have
No,
discussed
I
this and
mentioned that in
didn't?
the
You
restating
voted
of the
against the
motion.
letter. Sorry.
I mentioned it in the restating of the motion.
Okay, and I mean, I hope this gets discussed at exec too for future reference.
I have no doubt.
I'm
You
sure
are
it will
welcome
be.
to come to
Whether
exec.
whether it was appropriate.
I'm sure it'll go to exec and I'm sure my name will get dragged through the mud, but hey, whatever.
You're welcome to come to exec, Dave, and speak. Well.
I'm sorry.
I can assure you that I will be dragged through the mud on this one.
Jesse?
Well, one of us will be. Anyone want to watch a mud fight between me and Paul?
Just, we have another item on the agenda. We just need to move to it.
Yeah, come
Just to
on.
be clear.
Will you guys stop sounding like a Tide advertisement, please?
All right,
Sorry,
Jesse.
Jesse.
moving us forward.
Be clear for everybody, because we have another another agenda item. We keep on saying the letter, and I just want to be clear, there's no.
Not writing a letter. Thank you. Yes.
Okay.
That's what we just voted on. No letter.
Any letter, a letter, any letter.
Okay,
letter.
thank you.
A statement.
Yes.
Exactly.
Okay,
Good.
I'm gonna move on to
Good.
agenda item number 2, which is, sorry, I have to find my place. 675 Avenue of the Americas, an LPC application for sidewalk planters. Welcome back. One thing to note is that this application also has to go before Transportation and Planning Committee, which I believe will happen in April. Is that correct, Jesse?
That is our goal. That is my
That is
one
the
of
goal.
many goals of.
So Daniel, thank you so much for waiting. Are you still here?
I am still here.
You're still here.
Still here
Thank
and
you
he's
so
very
much for
confused
waiting.
by
That,
us.
you know, I knew that this was going to be tough to go second tonight. Please go ahead with your application.
Sure. My name is Daniel Ash. I met before with you in October, and the the board gave some comments to our proposal at the time. Can I share my screen now?
Yes.
Do you see the drawings now? Yes. Okay. When we were before you in October, we were looking to put planters in. We had put them in a haphazard manner, really just fitting them in wherever we were allowed to, but we thought we were allowed to. And the board gave us a lot of comments about how it didn't fit in with the character of the building, comments about the type of planting not being appropriate for keeping pedestrians and bikers safe, and that the location of where we're putting the planters didn't make a lot of sense. So we went back to the landscape architect, talked about what we could do, and I'm showing you now a revised plan of fewer planters. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the idea behind what we were trying to achieve here. What you could see here is that some areas are shaded and some are not. The white areas are what was allowed where we could put planters based on the proximity to the entrance, as well as other street furniture. So this is just an elevation to show you what we're looking to do now is really to put 4 planters around the main entrance. We're fronting it symmetrically on both sides, as in what area we're allowed to, and around the 2 other entrances, we're lining it up with the columns. So now it's more in line with the existing building architecture. We've chosen smaller plants now that only go 2 feet high, so that you could see that it won't really block the total with the plant, and the planter itself is only gonna get about 6 feet high, so that it's not gonna impede any vision into the bike lane. And in terms of the color, we have matched to the brick that's on the existing facade to pick a similar color. I know it's a little hard to see here. I also had a bigger picture that we've chosen this color that's going to match with the existing brick, so that we've mostly answered the concerns from before that the board had the last time we presented in October. I could scroll through the rest of it, but I'm not sure what you've seen. This is the existing area. There's currently poles and garbage cans, so that blocked a lot of area that we might have put planters. We tried to get it to the most that we could fit in while keeping symmetry and matching with the character of the existing building. These are similar planters, but here the planting is 4 feet high.
Ours will be half the height of that. This is just a proposed and existing elevations for the whole frontage. This was showing you again the white areas are what could be permitted to put things, and here's where we're actually going to attempt to put them. This is where I started, and this is just some pictures of nearby that other locations around this area have planters as well. Let me know if you have any questions that you'd like to discuss.
Thank you, Daniel. Are there any questions from the committee? Pamela?
You're on mute, Pamela.
But I had done that. Sorry, Daniel. I thought I heard you say that these planters were going to be 6 feet in height. And then I heard you say 4 feet. So I'm not sure can you clarify on that?
Sure. The planter is 4 feet. The plant that goes on top of the planter is 2 feet, getting to the total height of 6 feet.
So there's the 6 feet. Okay. Thank you. Is there any of these schematics that show where the existing street furniture is? Maybe I missed that somehow.
Yes, this is the existing plan here. Street lights, traffic call box. There's a parking meter over here. Bike racks.
Oh boy. Okay. And the street vendors that are there presently, is there any conflict between these sightings and their sites? I'm assuming they're licensed, they're there all the time.
They do have a license, but it wasn't specifically for this area. And the area where they have their vending set up on one side was encroaching on what should be allowed by the DOT because they were too close to the entrance.
The Trader Joe entrance, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, I think you could see.
So there's a street lamp there. Does that mean he has to decamp altogether from that site?
He's going to have to go to the other side or decamp from this site, yes.
So that puts him out of business.
Not out of business, just not for this in front of the street where he is encroaching on the entrance to begin with.
Yeah, he's been there a long time and he's got quite a clientele. And what about at the other end of the block down by Michael? On the 22nd Street end?
I don't think we were showing anything over there in our photos.
Okay.
Pamela, would you mind if I piggyback on you a little bit here? Because this
Go
was
right ahead. I've asked my questions and I
when
think I
this
got my
came up
answer.
when this came before us last October, part of the reason that I was against the original proposal is that it is my belief, walking that block an awful lot, that there are always street vendors running a good portion of the block. Not as bad as between 22nd and 23rd, but it's not just the one vendor on that block. And there was no, last time, I don't even think we had a single picture of them. I'm still not sure how this current proposal takes into account the people who are already there. I mean, telling them that they have to decamp and set up somewhere else so we can put planters in front of this building doesn't seem to me to be equitable.
Got it.
Thanks, so Dave?
Yeah, I was just going to ask if the motive for these planters is just to displace the vendors. Is there any other reason for them?
They wanted to beautify the building from what the landlord asked us to look at and make it similar to other buildings in the area.
Okay.
Now, Betty, sorry, Pamela, your hand is still up, but I think you're done, right?
Yeah, I was sorry this proposal came back. I thought it wouldn't come back. As I walk this area a lot too, and it is very, very congested in a happy way, in that there's a lot of shoppers and people like going to these stores. And I don't see a valid purpose for having something, a planter and a plant that's 6 feet tall, because it seems like it would block the visibility of what's going on this curb area. And it just seems, I haven't thought too much about the vendors, but I know that they're there. And it seems like a shame to have to move them away. I mean, I had at one point thought maybe you could put the planter and the bush right flush to the front of the building rather than along the curbside. So I have a lot of reservations about this, because I think one of the things that we raised the last time was pedestrian flow, and it is so crowded. Why would we want to have more stuff on that sidewalk? So I have a lot of reservations about this.
Thanks, Betty. Hector?
Yeah, I echo the same sentiment. I can't see, it's 6 feet tall. I mean, really, I'm 5'10". And, obviously I won't be able to see the curb either. And I can imagine other people as well. So honestly, that's not even short enough. And secondly, yeah, they could be put flush against those very columns itself against the building if they want to really beautify things. It is very congested. Honestly, I'm kind of a little upset that some of these vendors will literally be put out of business and displaced, because if you move forward with this plan, that's exactly what's going to happen. They're not going to have any room, and legally they can't get any closer to the building and sell their goods. I mean, once you put those planters in, that's it. They're out. They're done. So, and honestly, the building is beautiful the way it is. I don't see what these planters are going to really do to enhance the look of the place.
So thanks, Hector. I just want to mention that, this is an LPC application for us. It's going to go before transportation, but I would love to hear any comments that might, be applicable to a second letter to LPC regarding, the neighborhood character or the reasons why people do not think this is an LPC, should be a recommended LPC application. Jessica?
Well, I was just going to say, we're already on, if folks don't remember, I mean, I know there's been a suggestion of this coming back, but we are already on record denying or opposing this application. So, and we have a letter that was nicely drafted in October. So if anyone, unless someone feels differently, opportunity to re-up that letter in light of the new presentation, I think would be very appropriate.
David, I can't tell if your hand is still up or
we're now talking about LPC, but as kind of an afterthought, I'm a cyclist. I ride in that 6th Avenue bike lane all the time. Your eyes are not at 6 feet off the ground on a bike, especially when there's a curb that you're right next to. I think it is a little bit of a liability for people stepping out in front of bicyclists. I'd be a little less comfortable riding there. I don't see how this enhances the appearance of the building in terms of LPC. It kind of, even though they've tried to make the two planters at the center symmetrical about the central entrance, it still feels a little haphazard. And, I could make a motion to send LPC a letter saying that we don't want these, as Carrie suggested.
I would second that motion.
Pamela, did you have something to speak to on that motion?
on that motion. I might suggest that if we were going to accept any planters at all, that the two that bracket the main entrance of the building should go flush to the face of the facade of the building. They will ultimately become places for people to leave their garbage and put their cigarette butts. And any plant that's willing to survive would be a miracle. But yeah, over at the curbside, David's point about the cyclists is the same is true of anybody using that passage. Someone could step off the curb from behind a bush and get smushed immediately. It's just, there's too much street furniture as well.
Sorry, I'm just gonna interrupt for 1 second, because we have a motion now, so the motion.
Can I respond to just one point of there? Two things. One
I
is-
don't think you actually can. I think we need to go through our motion first.
Sorry.
Am I right about that, Jesse?
Yeah, if you have a motion and it's seconded, let's get
I
it.
do, yeah. So if there's anybody who has something to say about that motion on the committee, if not, we're gonna take a vote. I'll summarize. I believe the motion was to recommend denial because it is not in character with the building itself. It's not necessary. It could contribute to potential pedestrian unsafe conditions, and the vendors, it could contribute to the vendors losing their spot on the street. More eloquently said in a letter. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Sorry, I'll give you a chance to put your hands down.
Pam, I'm putting your hand. Okay, there you go. Thank you.
Is anyone
My hand
opposed?
was, my hand was supposed to go up previously. Something happened to the machine.
That's
Sorry.
okay. Is anyone opposed? Okay, great. Is anyone present not eligible or what's
Abstaining.
Abstaining.
Thanks. Okay, great. So the motion passes. We'll write another letter, Jesse, that's to the same effect or the same.
I don't, to my knowledge, I don't believe anything that was listed in your motion is different than what we were concerned. Maybe there, well, we'll have to take a look, but we can just maybe write a very short letter and reference the original letter.
Right. I appreciate you coming back, Daniel, and the changes that you were trying to make. I think our issues just simply stand as they were, and going from 4 to 6 doesn't really help. I mean, I'm 5'4" and a 6 foot plan is not, I'm not gonna be able to see the street. So Brad, your hand is up. I'm just wondering if you wanted to abstain or oppose or.
Yeah, I'm opposed. I don't agree. I like it. Thank you.
Okay, so we have 1 opposed. Thank you. Thanks, Daniel, for coming. I know you're going to Transpo, so good luck with that one. I think that we're probably good, right, Jessica?
Harry, you got anything else we can vote no on?
It has been a very negative evening. I don't, but I do, we are continuing to work on discussing the zoning text amendment for Chelsea Historic District, which is on point for tonight. We keep reaching out to people to have meetings, so we would love it if everyone would be a little bit more flexible with their time, just a tiny bit, so we can start having a meaningful conversation around this. We're not letting it go. And I think that we will be reconvening on the discussion that we had tonight and not wait a year. So I don't know, Jessica, is there anything else you want to say? Thanks, everyone.
But needs to make a motion.
Yeah.
Oh,
Move we adjourn.
is there a second?
Who wants to second that one? There we go, Tina.
Thank you, Tina.
Thanks, Tina. Thanks, everyone. I think it was a great conversation. And Paul, we will be in touch shortly to.
Yeah, let's put it on next month's agenda. Make sure, let's keep this alive. Let's not let this go another year of waste.
For sure.
We've had 5 committee meetings. We've had 5 or 6 committee meetings on this, so let's make sure we wrap this up.
Yeah,
Yes, we will
Thank
do
you.
that.
good point.
Thanks, everyone.